The first thing Arven Malik saw when he walked through the glass doors of Helvane Technologies was his own name being removed from the employee board. He had been awake for nearly 30 hours, carrying a small suitcase from Germany, a folder containing the final project reports, and a cheap plastic airplane that his 8-year-old son had given him before the trip. He had imagined coming home to applause, maybe a handshake from the executives, and most importantly, the moment when he could finally kneel down and hug his little boy. Instead, the receptionist would not even meet his eyes. His manager stood at the end of the hallway with folded arms, and beside him was the CEO, waiting with an expression so cold that Arven immediately knew something terrible had happened. Arven stopped several steps away, still wearing the dark suit he had traveled in. His eyes were tired, his beard slightly untrimmed, and his hand was wrapped around the tiny plastic airplane. The CEO, Dorian Voss, looked at him and simply said that his employment was terminated effective immediately. Arven thought he had misunderstood. He had spent 6 months in Germany completing the company's most difficult engineering project, sleeping in temporary apartments, working through weekends, and sending nearly every paycheck home because his son, Kian, needed school fees and medicine. The project had been delivered ahead of schedule, and Arven had personally solved a technical problem that 3 senior engineers had failed to fix. Yet none of that seemed to matter now. Dorian told him that the company had suffered losses because of a supposed reporting error and that Arven was being held responsible. There was no investigation, no warning, and no opportunity to defend himself. If you believe people deserve kindness, second chances, and the opportunity to prove their worth, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, leave a comment, and subscribe to Beyond Single Dad. Your support helps us bring more emotional stories of courage, sacrifice, and second chances. Arven looked down at the folder in his hands. Inside were the signed German inspection reports, technical approvals, and final documents proving that the project had been completed exactly according to the company's instructions. He quietly explained that the numbers in the disputed report had not been entered by him. He had sent the original figures from Germany weeks earlier. Dorian barely listened. He said the company needed someone to take responsibility, and Arven was the easiest person to blame because he had been working overseas without anyone from headquarters watching him closely. The words struck harder than the dismissal itself. Arven had sacrificed birthdays, school events, weekends, and precious evenings with his son because he believed loyalty meant something. Now that loyalty seemed worthless. He walked out of the building carrying the same suitcase he had entered with 6 months earlier, except now it felt heavier. Outside, the afternoon sun was bright, traffic moved normally, people laughed near a coffee shop, and the world continued as if nothing had happened. Arven stood on the sidewalk for several seconds before pulling out his phone. There was a message from Kian waiting for him. His son had written that he had made a welcome home drawing and was waiting at his grandmother's house. Arven stared at the message, swallowed his pain, and typed that he would be there soon. He did not tell his son that he had lost his job. When Arven arrived, Kian ran toward him so quickly that the little boy nearly knocked him backward. Arven dropped his suitcase and caught him in his arms. For several seconds, the world disappeared. His son smelled like shampoo and crayons, and that familiar warmth reminded Arven why he had endured everything. Kian proudly handed him a drawing of the 2 of them standing beneath a giant airplane. Arven smiled, but tears filled his eyes. Kian asked whether Germany had been beautiful, and Arven told him it had been cold, busy, and far away, but nothing there had been as beautiful as coming home. That evening, after Kian fell asleep, Arven sat at the kitchen table and opened his laptop. He searched for jobs. There were hundreds of positions, but his savings were frighteningly small. His rent was due in 2 weeks. Kian's school fees were due the following month. The electricity bill was already sitting unopened beside the sink. Arven rubbed his face and whispered that he could not fall apart. Not yet. The next morning, he began applying everywhere. Companies rejected him because he was considered too senior for some positions and too specialized for others. One recruiter told him that being fired from Helvane Technologies would make employers suspicious. Another asked why the company had dismissed him immediately after such a successful international project. Arven had no good answer because he did not understand the answer himself. 3 days later, while sorting through his Germany project documents, Arven noticed something strange. The disputed financial figures were not merely wrong, they were formatted differently from every report he had prepared. The document carried a timestamp from the headquarters office, recorded during a period when Arven was physically in Germany and asleep according to his travel records. Someone had altered the final report after he sent it. Arven's heart began beating faster. He searched through his archived emails and found the original attachment. The figures matched the German documents perfectly. Someone had changed the report after it reached headquarters. But why? Before he could investigate further, his phone rang. The caller was the elderly chairman of Helvane Technologies, Professor Matthias Keller, a German businessman who rarely interfered in daily operations. Arven had met him only once during the Germany project. The chairman spoke quietly and asked whether Arven was available for a meeting. Arven agreed, although he had no idea why the most powerful person in the company wanted to see him. The following afternoon, Arven returned to Helvane Technologies. This time, he was escorted directly to the chairman's private conference room. Dorian Voss was already there, along with several senior executives. The atmosphere was tense. Arven stood silently, wondering whether he was about to be accused of something worse. Then Chairman Keller entered. He did not sit down. He looked directly at Arven and began speaking in German. The room became completely silent. Arven understood every word. The chairman said that he had personally reviewed the Germany project and that Arven had saved the company millions of dollars by identifying a structural flaw before the final inspection. He said Arven had worked longer hours than anyone else on the team and had refused additional compensation because he wanted the project completed successfully. Then the chairman turned toward Dorian and continued speaking in German, his voice becoming sharper. He said the falsified report had been traced to headquarters. Arven's breath caught. Chairman Keller explained that the original project records had been preserved on the German server. An internal audit had compared those records with the report submitted to the board. The altered numbers had been entered after Arven sent his final documents. The person responsible was not Arven. It was someone inside the executive office. Dorian's face changed. The chairman revealed that an employee working directly under Dorian had manipulated the report to hide unauthorized spending. When the discrepancy was discovered, Arven had been used as a convenient scapegoat because he was overseas and could not immediately defend himself. Arven stood there speechless. The chairman then looked at him and apologized. Not as a CEO apologizing to an employee, but as a man apologizing to another man who had been treated unfairly. He told Arven that the company had failed him, even though he had never failed the company. Dorian was dismissed from his position that same afternoon. The executive responsible for altering the records was suspended pending investigation, and Arven's termination was formally withdrawn. But Chairman Keller did something Arven never expected. He offered him a senior leadership position overseeing international projects. Arven shook his head at first. He said he needed time to think. The chairman smiled and told him that was exactly the answer he wanted. He did not want a frightened employee accepting a position because he needed money. He wanted a man who understood his own worth. That evening, Arven went home and sat beside Kian's bed. His son was asleep, hugging the little plastic airplane Arven had carried home from Germany. Arven gently placed his hand on Kian's hair and finally allowed himself to cry. Not because he had been fired. Not because he had nearly lost everything. He cried because after months of believing that sacrifice had gone unnoticed, someone had finally seen it. Weeks later, Arven returned to Helvane Technologies, not as the man who had been thrown out, but as the leader of the company's international engineering division. His office had a large window overlooking the city, but the first thing he placed on his desk was not an award or a photograph of Germany. It was Kian's little plastic airplane. Arven also changed something inside the company. He created a policy requiring employees to be heard before termination when allegations involved major projects. He established a support program for employees raising children alone and insisted that overseas workers receive proper documentation and protection. When one executive asked why he cared so much, Arven simply said that a company could measure profit in numbers, but it measured its character by how it treated people when they were vulnerable. Months later, Chairman Keller visited Arven's office. He looked at the plastic airplane and smiled. He told Arven that his son had given him the best reminder of leadership. Arven looked through the window at the bright afternoon sky. He remembered standing outside the company months earlier, believing his career was over. He remembered the fear in his chest and the unopened bills on his kitchen table. He remembered thinking that sometimes good people lose simply because they are standing in the wrong place at the wrong time. But he had learned something more powerful. Being rejected is not always the end. Sometimes it is the moment before the truth comes to light. Sometimes losing a door forces you to discover that you were meant to walk through a much bigger one. And sometimes, the person who looks powerless today is the person whose courage will change an entire room tomorrow. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who needs encouragement, and subscribe to Beyond Single Dad. Your engagement tells us that stories about kindness, courage, fathers, and second chances still matter. Before we end, write, "Second chances matter," in the comments if you believe that one unfair moment should never be allowed to define a person's entire life. Arven never forgot the day he returned from Germany. He never forgot the cold words of the CEO or the silence of the hallway. But he also never forgot the moment the chairman spoke in German and finally revealed the truth. Years later, whenever Kian asked his father about the little airplane on his desk, Arven would smile and tell him that it reminded him of the day he almost lost everything, and discovered that his greatest strength was never his job, his title, or his salary. It was the promise he had made to his son that no matter how hard life became, he would keep moving forward. And sometimes, that promise is enough to carry a person all the way home.